have joining us just a phenomenal guy. This man has been working in the industry for years. He is the CEO of Victura Games. I'm going to go with because I don't want to sound like an idiot. He's the force behind the recently released huge hit 6 Days in Fallujah. We're not going to waste any time, guys. Let's just dive right into it. Please welcome to the show, Peter Tamte.
Yay! Thanks. Thank you. I like the type of industry part better, though.
I mean, you are. Let's be real. You are.
Where's we going with this?
You've been around. Not to date anyone here, but you have been around for quite a while. You have, such an incredible career. You've been. I did the homework. You've been involved in so many huge franchises, big hit games. There's so much we can talk about. And in our last interview, we did all the background. So now I feel like this is an opportunity for us to really dig into the material. So just as a reminder, if you can give a quick rundown of some of the properties you've worked on and how you've gotten to your position in the industry that you're in today.
Sure. Yeah. Well, my career goes back about 30 years or so. I built a Macintosh software company called Macsoft. We grew that to be the largest Macintosh consumer software publisher in the world. That got Steve Jobs' attention, and he asked me to run worldwide consumer marketing, senior director of consumer marketing for Apple. Did that through the turnaround. Then a couple buddies of mine who had built a company called Bungie asked me to join them at Bungie, helped them as executive vice president at Bungie, sold that company to Microsoft partway through so they could make a game called Halo, release a game called Halo. And then I started another business called Destineer. As part of the work at Destineer, which has led us to the conversation we're having tonight, we published video games around the world and also had a business building training systems for the Marine Corps and for the intelligence community. And as part of that work, I got to know a lot of the guys who were getting deployed back and forth because they'd be sent to our office to become subject matter experts, and so they'd vanish for a few months and then they'd come back, right? And I got to know a bunch of these guys really, really well. And that is what led to 6 Days in Fallujah, the product we're talking about now. Yeah.
So exciting. So let's, before we dive into the game proper, I want to ask a couple questions that kind of were on my mind. I was sitting back and I was thinking about, the industry at large, the military's role in games, and obviously the pop culture show. So, pop culture in the military and then pop culture in gaming, and just really kind of kicking around these concepts. So let's start out with, what are some of the main challenges and opportunities for a company like Victura in the current gaming market?
Well, I guess it depends. There's, when I think about the industry, you have multiple tiers of game companies. You've got the really big game companies like Activision, or should we call them Microsoft? You've got, and EA, Ubisoft, all these guys that are, AAA, big companies making big budget games that cost, $200, $300 million to make. Each of them, but are very, very big projects. You've got a tier below that, we call it AA tier, and that's budgets that are less than $300 million, $200 million, but are still high production values, high expectations from consumers, very emotionally deep experiences, certainly. And that's the tier that we're trying to compete in. And then you've got the, A, B, indie studios below that are making games with smaller budgets, anywhere from a few $100,000 to $5-10 million or something like that. And you could expect that typically the sales for those games correspond with those kinds of budgets. The ones that are costing $200 or $300 million are generating hundreds of millions of dollars or even billions of dollars in revenue. The ones that cost a few $100,000 typically generate a few $100,000 to $1 million or $2 million in revenue. And then you've got the breakouts from that indie group. So every once in a while, one of those indie teams will release a game that may have only cost them a few $100,000 or $1 million to make, but sell 6, 7, 8 million units.
Right.
All $30, $40 a piece, something like that, with a very, very small team. So it's kind of hard to say, hey, this budget is going to result in these kinds of sales. Generally, it's true. And so when you think, what is the opportunity for a game company? Well, it really varies, because you got some of the small guys that are just doing incredible traction with their games. And then you've got some of the really big guys like Activision or Microsoft or EA releasing big games that don't get that kind of traction as well. So all over the board.
No, you say these things, I think of like Among Us being one of those games that came out of nowhere.
7 million units in like a month.
Yeah. And then on the flip side of that, like you were saying, you got your Cyberpunk, which billions of dollars in production, it seems like, and then didn't do so well. Struggled.
They had some pickup. Yeah, they had some. Yeah, which they, to their credit, are like, we're not giving up. We're going to come right back. We're going to fix the things that people are complaining about, and we're going to come back stronger than ever. I give them credit for coming back in round 2.
Yeah. We already got people in the comments like calling out Battlefield 2042, Redfall. They're saying it. It's not from me. It's not from Peter. It's just people just throwing things out there. Just saying.
It can happen. It can happen.
It
can definitely happen. And if I could say this in defense of every video game company, having been in the business for a long, long time, the complexity of making games has gone up so extremely high. We're dealing with very, very high consumer expectations. Because what happens is when somebody like Activision ships Call of Duty and it generates $3 billion in revenue, the mandate from the management team at Activision is not, hey, I don't want you to spend, $325 million. Make sure, your budget's $300. Don't go over $300 million, right? The mandate is, this is a $3 billion franchise, don't screw it up, right? So that means then that the production quality goes up, and that affects everybody across the entire industry because it raises consumer expectations. We found with our game, for example, players are having a hard time distinguishing the fact that, well, we got 50 people working on this game, right, and Activision has 1,000 people working on Call of Duty, but yet the expectations are very, very high for what we can do with those 50 people.
Exactly. And I'm curious, I don't want to get too much into let's say, profit margins and the minutia, the financials. But I know, as a guy who's really into the industry and I love reading about this stuff and playing games, especially, I'm a gamer, we've seen the cost associated for the industry, it grows, right? Because now you need HD, and then now you need 4K, and now you need all these different play modes, and so the price it costs to make a game goes up, and yet for what seems like ever, price points have been $60 a game, so I'm sure that is a different type of struggle on that maybe the consumer doesn't see, but from your side of the business, it's something to really a challenge to contend with.
Absolutely, the game budgets are soaring through the roof. In order to do anything that looks anything reasonably close to those big AAA games, it takes a lot of craftsmen working very, very hard. Those people, it takes a lot of them. They all have to get paid, and the budgets just keep going up and up and up. That's absolutely true. Now, fortunately, we're seeing that the sales for games that can really hit it are also higher than they used to be. So the bargain that we're making isn't necessarily that it's going to crunch the margin. The bargain is that more people are going to buy the game if we invest this additional money in it.
Right. If you put the money where it needs to be in the right places and you hit that sweet spot, you're gonna see a lot of return. Question from Phil in the chats. This is, I guess, a Bungie question. How fast did Bungie get to AAA? Was it after Myth or was it Halo 1?
Well, I would call I would definitely call Bungie a AAA developer at the Myth and Myth 2 phase, even probably Marathon before that. It was definitely Bungie, and I've just, in fairness, I joined Bungie after they had already built Marathon and Myth, so I can't take any credit for the successes of those games. But they had in the Macintosh games market, and then of course in the Windows market as well with Myth, they definitely had established themselves as a AAA company, a AAA independent game studio. So yeah, I'd call them AAA at that phase, even though they were an independent AAA company. It was a little bit easier in those days to be an independent AAA company, just from the sense that there wasn't such a huge gap in the budget between what a smaller team could do. But what Bungie did, it's just amazing. Alex Seropian is still a friend of mine. He's the CEO of Bungie. And, he and Jason Jones, when they were building the company, did this remarkable job of bringing in an incredible amount of talent into the company. They were very particular about who they wanted on the team, and they were able to assemble this group of people who were truly innovators and just remarkably talented in each of their areas. And that is absolutely one of the reasons why Halo did what it did.
Fantastic. Now you've been in the video game industry over 2 decades and worked on, like we talked about, some of the most influential games of all time, from Halo, Age of Empires, Unreal Tournament, all these things.
Yep, sure.
How do you see the evolution of video games as a medium and as a form of art, really? How does that relate in terms of like the pop culture of it all?
Right. Well, and that gets into what we're trying to do with 6 Days in Fallujah. I think that we have an opportunity with video games to help people understand events and people in ways that can only be understood through interactivity, by actually trying to be those people. It is one thing to watch somebody on a TV or a movie screen, try to overcome a particular challenge. But when you are the person who has to overcome that challenge for yourself, you naturally understand that situation much, much better than if you'd watch somebody else solve that challenge for you. So I think the real opportunity for video games, and one that we're specifically targeting here with what we're trying to do with 6 Days in Fallujah, is to say, let's take important world events, things that shaped the way our lives work today, and put players inside of those situations to understand what really happened. In the case of 6 Days in Fallujah, it's the Battle of Fallujah is in many ways a microcosm of what had happened during the entire time period, and very reflective of just the general challenges of trying to overcome an insurgency inside of a city. These are lessons that seem like they have to get relearned over and over again by society across centuries. and Von Clausewitz talked about it 250 years ago. And when we think about Fallujah and 6 Days in Fallujah, our goal is to put players in that specific situation so that they can understand concepts like friction, the friction of war. They can understand why no plan survives contact with the enemy. They can understand some of these concepts that the military leaders have been trying to get the political leaders and the general population to understand for literally centuries. But when you play this game, even for just a few hours, you begin to understand the truths of what they've been trying to say for all these centuries, because you are the one who had to solve it, and you couldn't solve it without these compromises or these challenges.
Yeah, the proof's in the pudding. I love what you were saying too, because there's a famous, what was it, Mike Tyson's quote, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Right? Like that's combat in a nutshell, man. We drew up all these diagrams. Look, Article 15-21, like in this diagram, it shows, like, no, when shit hits the fan, you make it work or you don't.
That's exactly right. And when you think about how are people's perceptions of combat shaped, most people who haven't actually been there, And some people might get the opportunity to hear stories from a friend who served, or maybe they'll see a story in a newspaper. But by and large, people's ideas about combat are shaped through mass media, through film, through games. And in most of those cases, those films and games are in most cases, glamorizing, right? And so we started with this premise of realism and trying to give players a really difficult challenges that force them to use real tactics, to really work with their teammates, to and the only way you can do that is by making it very difficult for them to be solo, right? So if you play as a lone wolf in 6 Days in Fallujah, you will not get far. You must work with your team. And it's interesting because we'll watch players. I mean, we tested this ahead of time, right? With consumers, we bring 4 Call of Duty players in and let them play the game. And of course, all 4 start the game by running off in 4 different directions. Exactly. And then they come back, and they last 30 seconds, right? They come back, and then, they try it again, but they're a little bit more cautious in their movement, but they're still doing four different people doing 4 different things. But eventually, by the 4th or 5th try, somebody in the group will always say, hey, do you think we ought to stick together and talk to each other about the threat? It happens every time. And then when that actually happens, all of a sudden you see that little, that little unit start to gel and start to work together, and then they start to go through. And then what we found, which is I think just one of the most interesting things as the game has shipped, is we're finding that experience of struggling and then overcoming a difficult challenge together brings people closer together. And so we're seeing relationships develop through the game, across the country, across the world, because these 4 people went through a difficult situation together and solved that challenge together. Yeah.
Having played it, yes. Having lived it and having played it, yes. I'm just gonna say yes. We do have some really great questions from Greg and Scott. I'm gonna get to those guys. Hang on, don't think I didn't see it, but I feel like that's a later discussion, but I do want to get to that. I'll circle back. But Phil says, yes, this will help people to describe to their friends like, hey, our friend Mike, he was in Iraq. Now you know why he acts the way he does. Now you know why he's a little, he's a little skittish. And then from Angry Elf in the chat, he says, the enemy always gets a vote. We were talking about, right. The fight and how things work. Exactly. Yep. Before we dive fully into the game, I want to ask you kind of on a larger sense, what are some of the ethical and kind of social implications when you're creating a game that depicts real world conflicts and events?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question that we've struggled with for the 15 years or so that since the game was originally proposed to me by a Marine who was in Fallujah. Yeah, I mean, so there's some things there are some lines we don't cross, I guess, right? One of the things that I don't think our world is ready for is for us to recreate the death of a real person. I mean, we wouldn't do that unless this is something that their parents, for example, really wanted us to do, and that hasn't been a request so far. So, so I think, when you think about ethical challenges, I think that's one of them. Instead, in the game, their friends describe their sacrifice instead of us recreating that in gameplay, because we still also want to recognize and not forget about the people who did that. I mean, after all, keep in mind, one of the reasons why this game started was because this Marine friend of mine, Eddie Garcia, Marine Sergeant, told me stories of things that had happened during the battle that I hadn't heard. And I was embarrassed that I hadn't heard them. And I thought if I hadn't heard them, a lot of other people hadn't heard them. And so one of our goals is to tell these stories because of the remarkable things that so many of these Marines and soldiers did during that battle. So when you say ethical, that's one of the ethical concerns we've got. The second one I think that we're very mindful of is what are the lessons that people are going to take away from this? And that is where the realism comes in. And one of the things that has been interesting to us is we've watched and listened to comments from people who played the game both before we shipped it in user testing, and then now. We want it to be difficult. We want it to be very, very difficult because we want to drive home that reality. And we hear from players who have not been exposed to combat before in a realistic way over and over again say, wow, that's harder than I thought, or that is, I wouldn't want to have been there. I've heard that an awful lot. A lot of additional respect for the people who were put into that situation. So the experience that we create must mechanically stimulate particular emotions. And those emotions must be consistent with what the Marines and soldiers who were actually in that scenario told us they experienced. That's hard to do. That is actually very, very hard to do. But that is something I think that we're getting right so far.
Right. Man, so much of what you talked about too it makes so much sense, and it really hits home for me. First, the idea of the sacrifices that so many men and women have made, and not glorifying it, but honoring it and respecting it is such a huge part, and something that, maybe Hollywood doesn't quite get the right message across sometimes. And it's also something like this, I feel, having gotten to play it and see it and watch it kind of develop over the years, because I've been such a fan of it since it was first announced like a decade ago, is this idea that, even for all the true stuff that gets put out, so your Black Hawk Down, your American Sniper, Lone Survivor, all those things that are based on reality, I feel like it tells the story of the 1% of the 1% of the 1%, right? It's the Navy SEAL, right. It's the Green Beret, it's the, these guys that they do exist. These are real people, but it's not the experience of 99.9% of us veterans. It's not our experience. Sure. Myself as a combat Army infantry airborne combat guy, I saw some shit. I did some shit. Yeah. But by no means did I deal anything like what those guys were dealing with. And so a game like this has the opportunity to show it as it is, as it was for a lot of us that were in those situations. So I think it's a hard thing to do, but I mean, from all my friends, from my opinion, you guys nailed it. You did a really great job.
Thank you. It truly means the world to us to hear that. It is central to why we're doing it, and to get that validation back that we got that right. What you just said, I guarantee is going to get spread across our entire development team tomorrow.
I'm honored. So like from Angry Elf, he says, this game is the Band of Brothers of the GWAT era. So that's high praise. That's high praise. Although Scott wants to counter, he says, if you wanted to give the experience I'm paraphrasing, but if you want to give the experience of 99%, you're gonna have to do a game where there are cooks and mechanics. So, is that the follow up? Is that your military simulator?
We'll see. I mean, there've been people who've been successful with logistics games, so there's he's not totally far off. It's not quite 99%. It is 6 out of 7.
Large majority. So let's talk about the game a little bit. It's been on early access since June 22nd. I was very fortunate. I got a code. I got to play it a little bit ahead of time. Very happy. And you guys gave us a code to give away for the audience, we really appreciated. The audience went nuts for it. They loved it. How is your perception of the reception? I asked that specifically because sometimes, right, there's perception, reality. There's maybe the higher ups and the lower get different. How is your perception of the reception of the game so far?
So good. I mean, so we were the number one best-selling PC game in the world for the whole weekend after we launched, and so that's number one. So that's great. And we've been strong since. We were a little worried because Steam started their summer sale about a week after we launched, and we weren't on sale, so that affected. And we didn't want to put the game on sale because we didn't want to turn off the people who had just bought the game a few days before that, right? But we still stayed in the top 10, oftentimes in top number 7, number 8, number 9, number 7. We just go kind of in that all through that next first 4 or 5 days of the sale, which that's a lot of interest. We've had literally tens of millions of people engage with the game in some way, whether that be through YouTube, through Twitch, visiting our page on the Steam store, something like that. So there's an awful lot of interest in what we're doing. We also at the same time received a lot of messages about things that we can do better. So more content, for example. There's only 4 missions in the game right now. A lot of players feel like there ought to be more than 4 missions. There's going to be a lot more than 4 missions. But one of the reasons why we started the game, released the game at this stage, is to get that kind of feedback. Because it's not just the 4 mission piece. We knew that we were going to get feedback about that. It's that, this person with this PC and this internet connection is having a connection problem. And we can't test for that. Trust us. All the networking issues we knew about were fixed before we shipped the game, right? And we had 50 people pounding on the game simultaneously, day after day after day, to make sure we got everything through it, right? And then, but you can't test for that sort of stuff, right? So we want to get that feedback. But then we also get other feedback, which is, it's a whole mess of the settings were confusing to me, or this part of the experience isn't quite right. You should do this, etc. And our goal in launching was to begin building a community of people who are going to stay with us for the long haul and help us establish 6 days as a franchise, as an experience that can continue to deliver these real world, highly realistic experiences across history. That is what we're trying to do, and we wanted to engage the community doing that. And so already, within just a few weeks of launching, our Discord server hit 20,000 members. Our Steam community has 70,000 members. In just 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, this is really, really a lot of traction. And all that stuff, all the things people are saying, all that stuff, it gets fed into a group of people on our team who evaluate all that information so that we can continue making the product stronger and stronger. At this point, we've only released, less than 10%, probably 5 to 10% of what's actually going to be in the game. And anybody who buys the game now, of course, gets all of that remaining content for free before the price goes up. But in exchange for that, we ask that they give us feedback, and so that we can continue making that experience stronger and stronger.
I love that. I'm sorry. I mean, it might be biased because you're my guest on my show, but I do love that, because how many times have, you've waited for a game, you pre-order it full price, and when it drops, it just feels like, did anyone test this? Did anyone play this before? And it's like, what is happening? Not to name names. I don't want to burn bridges. But sure. And so I'm okay. I'm okay with having that compromise with you and your organization, saying, hey, this is some of what we're doing. This is a taste of what we're doing. This is the, whatever you want to call it, the bones of what we're doing, and there's going to be so much more meat added onto it. Is it too much pressure to say, is there a timeline? Is there an idea of when more content might be coming?
Yeah, our goal is to release some new content every quarter, and then to actually get the game in full release towards the end of 2024.
I think that's very fair. I think that's very fair. I know for some it might seem like a long time, but like you said, comparing to these AAA, whatever, where there's a new Madden every year, so it doesn't I gotta wait a year for the full game, but it makes sense when you're building it piece by piece. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's our goal, and I want to make sure it's always a goal, right? And we'll have the content ready. But I'll tell you, there's an aspect of this that people don't fully, I think, contemplate about release timing, which is that it's very hard to make the content, first of all. But if you get that content done at a time when, let's say, Microsoft's about to release Starfield, right? You can't release it that week because nobody's going to pay attention. And when we count on that new content to stimulate new sales so that we can continue making the game better.
Yeah, I mean, right? it's the indie movie releasing the same day as like the next Avengers thing. It's like, you're not helping yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Not a good plan. Right, exactly right. So if we miss by a week or two, please don't send
hate mail. Hate mail goes straight to Peter. What's your email, Peter? The hate mail needs to go straight to you.
Feedback at WTFradio.com.
Yeah, I love it. That's perfect. Yeah, we'll take it all on. It's incredible too to say that to be willing to put yourself out there kind of this early in the process, right? To knowing that, like you said, it's limited, it's 4 missions, it's a small piece of the full content in a day and age where everybody's got a 30-second attention span, it seems like. I mean, it's hard to say, we're going to give you a sample and then slowly release it out. And then to say also that, send us the feedback. Let us know what you feel so that we can make the game better. Because I'm sure, like when you said, when you have 70,000 plus people playing it and a 50-man team, which I'm sure not all of them are going to read the incoming feedback. So like that's a weighted scale. Like it's slanted. How do they have the time to read all the feedback?
You know what? We are actually able to read most of the feedback. We have there's like 5 people that are out there looking at the feedback on the forums and in our customer service, and they and we are actually able to read the bulk of the feedback. Fortunately, a lot of the feedback runs in trends, so we're able to say, oh yeah, more content, got it. They want more missions.
Yeah.
Got it. Right. Yeah. So that's half the feedback.
Keywords. Yeah. Buzzwords.
Yeah. And so we can filter through it, but we do really have a human being, one of those people looking at all the feedback, looking for the trends and reporting the trends then to our leadership team. Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. We're going to get to the questions pouring in. I'm curious, just me and you in the room. Okay, we're just 2 guys chatting right now. I might know a little bit about IT and how these things kind of work out. Was there ever a moment where a bug became a feature, like kind of thing, where like, oh, that kind of worked out in the best way possible?
Well, almost, but we decided not to do it. There was a bug that literally made it look like like a Star Destroyer from Star Wars had crashed into the landscape of Fallujah. It looked exactly like that.
That's awesome.
I mean, we had the screenshots because everybody was like, that's weird. Click, click, everybody's taking screenshots. Decided that would not be appropriate. Yeah, so we took that out.
Yeah, you get a license. That's one of those, which actually brings another question to mind. And I know this is probably way too early to even think about. But sometimes you have games, Call of Duty, Fortnite, whatever, where it kind of starts out maybe serious and like, aesthetically looking real and these things. And the next thing you know, you got cowboys and space aliens and John Wick running around. Like, is there ever gonna be a point where you're like, kind of like, again, because the game is super, super real, super realistic, super in the moment. If there was enough feedback, would there be like kind of like a playful, like it turns into a paintball match or any like these crazy modes or anything like that?
We don't have plans for one right now. I wouldn't say that that's totally out of the question yet. Honestly, one of the challenges that we're still struggling with creatively is at some point we would like to have a competitive experience. Right now it's going to be a single player story campaign and a co-op experience and a variety of co-op experiences. But there are players that definitely want us to take what we've done with procedural architecture, for example, where the map changes every single time and put that into a competitive game. But on the other hand, I think because of the subject matter, we need to be very, very careful about how we would do that. So we haven't answered that question yet, but being able to leverage our technology in ways to create a competitive game that isn't a reproduction of a recreation of a specific battle, I think that's something that would be interesting to us.
Right. Yeah. No. And I think that makes perfect sense. And And we've seen it in the industry before. And again, I'll reference Fortnite, where the game that was originally envisioned and originally announced, and then there, I forget, for whatever reason, they kind of pivoted and they're like, well, you can do this builder thing. And then all of a sudden it blew up, and that became, and now that is Fortnite versus what it was originally intended to be. So, I mean, I'm sure there could be at some point.
Right. Battle Royale. Absolutely. It was Battle Royale. Yeah. Who knew? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. You don't know. I mean, here's the thing about making a video game. If you're going to do something truly innovative, you're going to spend years building that technology. But once you've got that technology, you can do a lot of things with it.
Right.
It just takes years to get you to that point. That's why it's taken us so long in the second round to make 6 Days in Fallujah, right? In the first round, what took us so long was because we made a completely destructible battle. That was okay. And then on round 2, we made procedural architecture and ditched the totally destructible battlefield for reasons that we can go into some other time if you're interested. But but procedural architecture also turned out to be almost as difficult of a technical challenge as a completely destructible battlefield. For dozens.
It's so true. It's so true. We have games today, the large majority of them, where they're not procedurally generated. It's loading a map, and you'll still have textures in the wrong places and things crashing, and like it's just drawing the map as it's supposed to be, and yet it sometimes can't get it right. So I can't imagine the amount of ones and zeros it takes to move things around constantly and make it work. It's insane. It really is.
It was hard. It was hard. I mean, I got a bunch of people who have made games for a long time. We calculated how hard it was going to be. It was 3 times harder than that for reasons that we just didn't see until you get into it. That's the problem.
Is there the potential, and again, we're asking real technical questions here, is there potential to license out the technology the way like the Unreal Engine, so to speak?
Probably not. Probably not. There's a couple reasons for that. Number one, we'd have to build an infrastructure to do that, and we'd have to, frankly, we'd have to make our tools a lot more robust than they are right now. It takes, in addition to the training somebody needs to have, for example, to be an artist or a level designer in the game. We look for people with years of experience doing that in other games. But then once they're on board, it takes 2 or 3 months to just train them in how to use our tools, and that's And then even at that point, they're still brittle, because we're constantly improving the base technology, which then means that you have to update the tools that are used to leverage that technology. So that back and forth is constantly creating new bugs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're just not set up to license. We're set up to just have an internal team that really can, with its own built-in tech support, call the engineer who wrote that bug.
Right, just pound away on the thing. So, where are you guys based out of? Remind me.
So the studio's based in Seattle. Yeah.
I was hoping it was nearby. I was like, I'm just going to show up. I'll figure it out.
You're welcome to. There's not always a lot of people in that office because we do a lot of remote work. Although the office is open every day, and we get people come in every single day. There's some people who prefer to work in the office, and there's some people who prefer to work remotely. So I can't promise, even if you do. So before you buy your plane tickets,
we'll coordinate.
And it's downtown Seattle, so you might want to bring some support.
Fair enough. Again, last kind of general question is that just to give people an idea, I know this is early access. It's PC only at the moment. Console is in the roadmap. It's in the plan
for our full release. Yes.
For the full release, is it like, I don't want to say cross-platform because I know that's not the right term. Is it both, or are you leaning one way or the other?
Oh, the plan is to be on both PlayStation and on Xbox.
Okay. Fantastic. I play on PC when I have to, but
you're a console guy.
I'm a console guy.
We've got controller for you.
Oh yeah.
You can play with the controller.
That's right.
We'll bring you one step closer. You can use a wired controller or a wireless, probably even.
Yeah. There you go. For us guys with accessibility issues, so I have nerve damage in my hands and missing some of my digits. It's a little more difficult, obviously, to play keyboard and mouse. So we appreciate when you guys put in there the accessibility for us to play. So.
Well, thank you. No, thank you, because that's another thing that we just invested a lot in, and it was very important to us. And we we have, and quite frankly, we missed it just a little bit on our initial release. The controllers, the controls of the controller were a little. There's 2 or 3 things that were wrong. First of all, last minute bug, we screwed up the settings. So if you chose one setting of this is the mapping for the controls on your controller, you got a different one, which I'm sure frustrated a whole bunch of people. We fixed that, but then some of the curves, the responsiveness were also not quite right, and there were a couple of bugs that we found and we fixed those, and we've got another batch of fixes that we're gonna release in our next patch, which could be this week or next week.
Yeah. I was gonna say, if I'm nitpicking, and I honestly, so much of the game I really enjoyed, and we talked about this briefly before we went live, is just the feel of it, right? The emotion that it elicits, where I go like, yeah, I remember this. I remember this feeling of panic and worry and stress and not knowing where that next bullet's coming from, and everything from the way the vision works, the way the radios work, there's such attention to detail in the moment. Someone else was mentioning, and I didn't even think about it to just now, the way where you're looking from inside or outside to inside, how kind of your eye has to adjust to the darkness and these different things, where, you might play another game and you go like, this is so annoying, but like in reality, this is what it's like. This is it.
You got it. Man. That's what we're trying to do. Yep, that's what we're trying to do. Taking some risks with that, because a lot of the things that we're doing in that regard are conveniences that other games have said, we're just not going to burden the player with those. And we said, we're going to burden the player with those.
Yeah. I just do it. No jams. I don't want to have to, chain and then tap the thing. Like, it just, we don't need that. I don't need that frustration. It's combat, man. We don't want that. Right? My weapon is always good. Never jams. Never did.
Thank you. That's another quote that I need to use, because that is a request we get over and over and over again. Weapons jam, especially the saw, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, yes, true. That's a holy war in the video game business that existed for 30 years, and I don't want to step into it. Yeah.
And honestly, again, me being an infantry guy, our bread and butter was our weapons. We would clean it on a mission. We'd be in the middle of it. If we're sitting down, we're cleaning it, because again, in the middle of a firefight, I mean, I used to always tell this with my team, there's only so many things you can control. You can be physically fit. You can control your own fitness level. What you put into your body, energy, food, you can control that to a degree. And the cleanliness of your weapon, right? These are the things we can control, because when the next contact comes, not if, when the next contact comes, it could be anywhere from anything, you need to be prepared. But yeah, my weapon never jammed, not once. I broke a firing pin once, but that was a whole separate incident. Okay, so some of the questions from the audience that I've been sitting on. From Greg, I really want to know how AI is going to be fully incorporated in games as a whole. I know it's already being implemented somewhat, but I feel like it could be limitless. I would assume it's used in 6 days just by the level design. So any comments on the AI of the whole thing?
So yeah, speaking specifically of 6 Days in Fallujah and our AI in 6 Days in Fallujah, we have taken a much different approach to AI than a lot of other games take. So because we have a co-op game inside of a procedurally generated world that is an open sandbox, we cannot use many of the techniques that are used for AI in Call of Duty. For example, you'll notice that when you can play Call of Duty with bots, for example, and they're not that great. And that's because there's a limit to how much intelligence they can build into them. The AI that they're using when you practice it with bots for a multiplayer game is different than the AI that they're using in a single player game. So we've taken a completely different, a third approach to how we call it block scale AI. And we allow the enemy AI to move anywhere on the battlefield. So if you're playing Call of Duty or most other single player games, or co-op games, they've got very narrow area, very small area that they can move in, and they have a limited number of things that they can do within that area. And they're basically established by when the player steps on a trigger or when they notice a threat. Okay, so we have taken a different approach to that. Our AI can go anywhere on the battlefield, and then they have a whole bunch of tactics we programmed into them that are based on the actual tactics that Marines and soldiers told us happened to them in Fallujah, as well as lots and lots of stacks of documents that we've gotten about the actual tactics. So they'll stalk you, they'll flank you, they'll set up ambushes, they'll hit and run, which is something that's kind of, yep, all these things. And then we had to optimize it, and we had to re-optimize it. We had to re-optimize it because the most expensive stuff that's happening in the game, expensive in terms of the cost on the CPU, what slows the performance of the game. The most expensive stuff is the character movement. And so if you've got 15, 20 AI running around a map, each of them calculating their own AI all the time, you've got to really optimize and re-optimize, make those super efficient, or you're only going to have 4 AI that are running around the map at a time. And the game's much different. So that is something we invested a ton of time, ton of money, smart people solving very difficult problems there. So that's the enemy AI. What you're going to see us doing later this year is giving you access to an AI fire team that are also going to have that level of intelligence that we've built into our enemies. That next generation, let's call it, simulation, AI simulation, and you'll be able to lead them with something we call the Go command, where for people who played the tactical shooters back, the original Rainbow Sixes, etc., or more recently Ready or Not, you've got, they've got wheels and stuff like that to assign this command, that command. So our Go command is a much different approach because we want the player to remain focused on the target and what's going on in the world and not to have interface get in their way.
Right.
So the Go command lets you issue a command as easily and quickly as you shoot your weapon. You aim, but instead of pushing the trigger, you push the Go button, and the game figures out what the right command is based on modifiers to that button and what you're pointing at. Between the two of those, there's a contextual understanding, and the player gives them a hint with a modifier key. And so between those two things, it we very accurately can understand when the player intends to. I want my guys to stack on that door as opposed to I want my guys to suppress that door.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, in the military sense of like in CQC and things, hand commands, right? There's only a finite amount of hand commands that we can give, but it's the most important things, right? It's the go, the stop, the shoot, the watch, whatever. And so having that makes total sense. And somebody put in the comments the same reaction that I had, like, hit and run, really? Like this, it's the most annoying thing, and it's sad, but it's true. You get to a point where you 2 shots would fire off, and the new guys, because they're like ducking and panicking. I'm like, yeah, it's not even worth it. The guy's gone. He's already gone. We get so numb to it of like this. That's just a bullet. It's fine.
Yes.
But yeah, you guys, man, you're nailing it. And do you guys have to do kitchen duty at all? Do they get like fire watch or anything like that? Because if so, you're all the way there.
Or sleeping on the mats that the insurgents slept on the night before.
Yep.
I heard that story a number of times as well.
Oh yeah, they're
crazy stuff.
We'd be out. Well, for us, we were usually out in the boonies and the woods and mountains, but you'd find holes dug out, and you're like, yeah, somebody slept here. I'm like, well, it's already there. Might as well.
Might as well. Yeah.
Might as well use it, man.
It's got to be eerie though. It's got to be weird and eerie.
It's
spooky.
It's definitely a weird feeling, but again, and every person's service was different and their experience is different, but I know, like, for me, we operated the majority of our time behind enemy lines, and so it just became like you go through a town, everybody waves, and then you get shot in the back. Like, that's just how you just get used to that experience. Another question: any possibility, and I can only imagine this adds to the level of difficulty. People ask me so much. Any possibility of this becoming VR, like having that kind of a part added?
Yeah. So interestingly, we actually started when we restarted the project in 2017. We actually built a VR prototype, and we ended up moving into flat screen instead of VR because the budget that it was going to take us to make the game what we needed it to be could not be supported by the size of the VR market. So now that we are doing what we're doing in flat screen, we may generate enough revenue to be able to afford to make a VR project. I did have Marines who served in Fallujah actually play the VR prototype. I'm speechless in trying to explain their reaction because it was very real. Yeah.
When you first said that, you're like, well, we had a prototype and then we did. Like, my thought was it was too real. It was too much, and they're like, you know what? Let's go flat screen because people can't handle that.
They had to sit down. They had to sit down after it. Yeah.
I could imagine. Yep. I got a couple guys in there. They're like, nope, not doing that. That's too much. That would be a lot to process. Even in we're still, in my opinion, at a point in gaming where again, some of those flat screen games, the 2D games, they're gorgeous. PS5 games. They push, but the VR, I feel like we're still not quite photorealistic yet. We're still a little bit catching up. They're coming out great. Some of these games are incredible to play. Vader Immortal and these games that I play, the Walking Dead one in VR. But you still, while you're immersed, you can still, I don't know, you tell it's a digital, whatnot. But I can only imagine in a couple years when the technology is like, when you're like, it's like Google Maps, but you're getting shot at. that's somebody said PTSD inducing. That could be.
It is only a matter of time before that between Unreal Engine 5 and the next generation probably of VR hardware. That combination probably.
Scary. Scary. A question from Scott. Does this game encompass both the first and second battle, or is it primarily set around a specific one?
Yeah, so the full release will start in the first battle and the March battle. And then most of the experience, however, will be in Phantom Fury, the second battle. So Vigilant Resolve, of course, was the one in March after the contractors got hung from the bridge. And then, well, actually, I don't want to, I guess most of your audience actually knows the story, so I'm probably not giving anything away, but for players who don't know, there's some surprises in what happened during Vigilant Resolve and the lessons that I think we learned from Vigilant Resolve. And then, so we're going to start there. We're going to, again, if you know the story, you'll know where we're going to end that part, and then come back to it in November, where Phantom Fury started, just outside the city.
Wow, that's incredible. We're already at an hour. Do you have a few more minutes? I
got a few more minutes for you. Yes.
Okay, outstanding.
I love the questions. Quite frankly, this is an audience that understands what we're doing and what we're talking about, which is refreshing. The
cross section of like hardcore military, but also like hardcore gamers. Like we know what we're talking about. I'm curious. So you've said obviously this is not a documentary, right? This is not meant to be the exact story of X, Y, and Z doing X, Y, and Z. More in capturing the stories and the feelings and the emotions and the things. You're not trying to make some type of political commentary on this, but a game that uses procedural generation to create different scenarios and outcomes each time. How does this feature affect when you're doing narrative and gameplay, right? Because we're so used to, especially in military games, here's your mission, there's your objective, go do the thing. what are the benefits and drawbacks of that in this kind of a game?
Yeah, right. Okay, great creative question. This is a struggle for us too, because the reason why procedural architecture exists is to simulate that feeling of the unknown. So if we don't have it, we feel like players are gonna, it's recon by death, right? You go in the room, oh, that's where the bad guys are. Okay, next time I'll start with my weapon up, right? So shoot the guy, but yeah. So, but on the other hand, there are situations where the physical geometry of the space was integral to the way that that encounter played out.
Right.
So then that's basically the way we're handling it. So in the engine, we can just say, don't regenerate this, just keep that static. So there will be specific parts of the experience in the campaign, especially
key moments
where we're just not going to regenerate that geometry. But in other cases where it just does not matter whether the door was on the left or the right, then we're going to procedurally generate those parts.
Outstanding. Okay. What else can I ask? Will I still have you? I think we've asked that. So video games, again, a more broad question, but video games have shown to have various effects on pop culture, inspiring movies, books, music, fashions, social movements, everything. The Hunger Games franchise I have here was influenced by the Japanese movie Battle Royale, which was based on a novel that was inspired by a video game. So what are some of the examples of what are some of the examples of video games that have influenced pop culture, in your opinion, that are, also influencing maybe some of the elements of the game?
So I think we certainly draw a lot of lessons from the original tactical shooters and tactical shooters that we've played over the years, for sure. We take some inspiration from the choices that they've made and how they've shaped that experience, understanding what we think was appropriate to take forward, what was appropriate to do very differently. So I mean, here I'm referring to all the Rainbow Six games, the original Rainbow Six games, although Siege there's certainly a lot to learn from Siege as well, but the original Rainbow Six games especially. Mm-hmm. And I would say Call of Duty more than Battlefield. And the reason why I say that is when I think of our inspiration, it's more, from the story standpoint, I think there is actually a lot to learn from the way Call of Duty tells stories. Mm-hmm. They've adopted a formula and it has become formulaic. I think everybody complains about that. It's become too formulaic. But from that formula, there are definitely lessons to learn about what works, can't really do interactively, and what you can do interactively. So there's some stuff to draw from that. But in terms of the mechanics, I would say it's everything from Dark Souls to like I say, all that whole collection of tactical shooters. We're a co-op game, even games like Army of Two, for example. There's things that we can learn from Army of Two. It's a third-person game, but there's still stuff we can learn from that. So, yeah, all the way across, I'd say that you can't really point to one specific thing. It's more like just this entire body of work. But I can tell you what I hope our impact will be on pop culture. Yeah. And there's a few points there that are really important to us. The first one is the reason why the project started was we believe from the stories we've been told firsthand by people who were there. We've been told remarkable stories about remarkable people, and the stories have not been told because the Iraq War has been arrested. And you could say certainly not fair to those individuals who did those amazingly courageous things. They did not do those amazing courageous things because they wanted their story to be told. They did them for other reasons. That's what's interesting. That's what is especially sad about a media that has been afraid to tell those stories, because those stories tell us an awful lot, not just about individuals, but about moments and how people can react in really, really difficult, challenging situations. And we want not just to tell those stories, but we want players to be able to test themselves and how they would respond in those same scenarios. So I think that, and I hope that, and I know for sure, already tens of millions of people who have never heard of the Battle of Fallujah are hearing about it now. They may not play the game, but they are hearing about it and they're curious about it. You can go on Wikipedia and look at, pages and when they get traction. Right after we announced 6 Days in Fallujah, the traction to the Battle for Fallujah went way up, right, on Wikipedia. So that's one piece. There's a second piece that I think that we're going to get into. That goes back to what I was saying earlier, which is it's something Eddie Garcia, the Marine who conceived the whole idea, said to me. He said, "Peter, there's no such thing as a kinder and gentler war. Right? If you're going to fight a war, you have to fight it to win, and that is bloody and disgusting and horrible. And so you better do everything you can possibly do to avoid it. But if you're going to fight it, then you have to win." So there's a lesson in that I think a general population does not fully understand because we get ourselves halfway into problems. But, if anybody's ever been in a fight, once you're in the fight, you actually really hope the fight's going to end.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's dangerous, and it takes a lot of courage when you are an individual in a city surrounded by people who are willing, anxious even, to die for a cause, and that cause is killing you. There isn't a second cause. That's the cause. The cause is killing you. Giving people that feeling, that understanding, I think, and understanding the consequences of their choices, all of which are bad, I'm hoping helps people understand the reality. Unlike the glamorization, but the reality of combat, I hope helps people understand that not just the respect for those people who we put into that situation, but the danger of that situation, and that the reality that avoid that, do everything you can to avoid that situation. But if you are going to fight, you have got to finish that fight.
That's so deep. And it's funny, I draw a parallel to you guys releasing this game. The idea of we started this, we got into it, we got to finish. There are people that don't want us to win. There are people that don't want to see this and want to stop it and whatever, and the political message and this, and then the hate and people, whatever. We've got to see it through. We've got to finish the fight. We got to win this fight. So
that's right.
Kudos, man, to you and the team. Two last questions for you. Mm-hmm. This is an industry that's built on copycat, in the sense of when something works, let's do that. Battle Royale is one of the most recent examples. Outside of maybe procedurally generated maps, which again, great, but a little easy of an answer, what's maybe something you believe that could be trendy, something that people are going to look at and go we need to implement that? What do you see? What are the highlights of the game?
So I think true stories is one of the things that's going to come. Honestly, when people saw the reaction to when we announced the game in 2009, it scared people away from true stories. But I hope that if we do this thing as respectfully and appropriately as we are trying our hardest to do, that it will show people that this is a genre. The concept of true stories is a genre that video games should be exploring. And I hope that that's a trend that we can stimulate.
Fair enough.
The second one is the games are going to get more difficult.
Which, I feel like, because obviously growing up in the 80s and games were built to not let you win. And then at some point it shifted into this philosophy of just let them die a billion times so that they can finish it. And now over the last couple of years, I have seen kind of with the Dark Souls, with these different kind of games where there's this return to form of No, it should be you should be something to finish a game. That should be something to talk about. So okay, I like that. That's a great answer. I love that. Last question before we finally let you go, because I can talk to you all day about this. This is this is so cool and so fascinating to me, and obviously to the viewers. A bunch of people still watching for some reason. I don't know what it. Listen to me talk. You know, knowing that the roadmap for this game, like you said, it could be a year or more, depending on how things turn out, to the full release. I know you're going to be fully head on this for that time. Do you ever take a moment to think, what's next? Is it a sequel? Is it a spin-off? Is it an all new IP? Just shake the crystal ball, the 8-ball. What do you see down the line?
More true stories for 6 days. Yeah, absolutely. So more true stories that bring insight into events that shape the world. That is what our mandate is, and I expect that, assuming that we have the good fortune to be able to continue doing this, that's what we're going to do.
Would you ever open it up, let's say, to like, here's a website, tell us your stories, and then you could like kind of pick and choose, like, wow, that's something, like, or is it like, how do you determine, what's the next series of stories, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, we're open to that. I get a lot of emails actually with people offering those stories right now. We've given some, but not deep thought into which stories we want to tell next. Our heads are very much consumed with trying to tell this one first. So, I feel bad actually, honestly, because the stories that I get sent are actually, many of them are I mean, you've lived it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you pick this one versus that? Yeah, it's hard.
It makes sense.
And so I feel bad because we can't necessarily respond as comprehensively to these people who've offered us these wonderful, amazing stories, because we're just so consumed right now with what we're doing with Fallujah. But I'm still collecting them. I just don't know if I can do it. You never know.
Yeah, rainy day. You never know. Do you think? And again, I know I'm putting you in a position to like think so far down the line. Do you think you want to tell more stories of that timeline? Stories of Afghanistan? Somebody said the Battle of Mogadishu. Like, is there? If you had to guess, we'll just say, I'm not going to hold you to it, but if you had to guess, is it a wider story, or is it more narrow to a specific time and place? I mean, what do you think?
So, either one. The stories from these modern times are, and there's so many of them that people don't know, that tell you something about what was going on. And so it's hard for me to say it's going to be, focused on a particular battle or a particular person, or it's going to be broader than that, because we just haven't really thought it all the way through yet.
It's fair.
Yeah, only because we consume it. Yeah, and it's not that it's not in the back of our minds. It is in the back of our minds. It is the back of our minds, but it's not. It hasn't made it to the front of our minds yet, because the front of our minds are just occupied 100 hours a week on getting Fallujah done.
I can't imagine the amount of pressure you guys are under, and this game, I mean, has such a history. Just the game, like, not even the stories that the game's about, but just the development of the game itself, and bringing it to life has such a storied history. I feel it's living the battle of Fallujah in its own way, right? Of attempting it, failing, attempting it again, and gotta win it no matter what it takes. So it's art and life to art, all those things. Man, there's so many great parallels with this. I love it. I'm gonna finally let you go. I gotta say that, hopefully a year from now, you could be the first 3-time returning guest, and we can talk about the full release and all the stuff, and then talk, postulate on the future and what's next, and talk about all the massive amount of awards you've won, and You know, you have the whole back line with trophies and plaques and all that stuff. So this has been Peter, man. I really appreciate you taking the time. This has been an absolute pleasure. I will give you the last few seconds here to talk directly to the audience, to the vets out there, to the players out there. Let them know what you think. Let them know where can they follow you, the game, buy the game, all that stuff. Talk about it.
Well, the game's on Steam, so just typing in 6 days on Steam will get you to 6 days of Fallujah. And I guess the message I know your audience is filled with people who served, and it's our honor. I think, you know, I grew up in a time when I was younger, when there was still a draft. This is before I was of draft age, but there was when I was younger, there was a time when I was pretty sure that I was going to end up serving, whether it was as a volunteer. You know, later it became clear that it'd have to be as a volunteer because when I was both young, it was mandated. And I think our culture has gotten away from that understanding of service and is such a theoretical that somebody else does, that the more that we can bring the reality back to people, I think that it'll help them understand the real people who we're asking to do these things. And so for me, when somebody who has stood guard on my behalf says, thank you for doing this thing that represents what we've done faithfully, I can't tell you what it means to us to hear those kinds of words. So I just want to tell your community thank you for the moral support you've given us when we've been under attack from people who don't understand what we're trying to do. One community that we counted on at all time that absolutely saw right through that and knew exactly what we were trying to do were the people who had served. So thank you very much. That support really, really meant a lot, not just to me, but to our whole team. Really did.
That's awesome. I mean, I can't. There's nothing better I can say about it. I mean, it's a great community, the military veteran community. I believe that, you know, we see what you're trying to do. There are I know, you know, certain shows or movies where we've called out where it's like, you know, this isn't for us. This isn't meant to show people what it's like. This is, you know, these movies like Purple Hearts and all, like, where you're just like, oh, come on, man. But I mean, I see what you guys are doing. I appreciate it as a gamer and as a veteran. I think it's incredible, and I wish you guys all the success. I'm enjoying my copy. I highly implore everyone out there to go download it, play it. And if you're not a gamer, spread the word. Just put it out there. Share it on social media. Let people know it's out there and it's available. And people say they're waiting for the PS5 release. So you got pre-sales ready for you when you guys put that thing out there, so you can get them pre-sales going. With that, I mean, yeah, I'm looking forward to our next conversation, because we got to have you back. When the console release comes out, and then we can start talking about the DLC. You know, I want to be Batman in the the Battle of Fallujah and all that stuff. You can start licensing skins and things like that. So. Outstanding. All right, guys, we are going to go to a quick break. I'm going to go say goodbye to Peter. When we come back, we'll have a little more show before we call it a night. Again, my guest, Peter Tamte, Victura Games, 6 Days in Fallujah. Go check it out. And we'll be back right after this break. Shots.